Hello everyone, NPC Chris here, and today I'm going to teach a basic lesson about how to paint minis because a bunch of people saw all that stuff and were like, teach me a basic lesson about painting minis. Who am I to say no? So today we're going to talk about the three super simple basic techniques that anyone can do to paint most models. Now, these are going to be really rudimentary techniques. I'm going to show you on one of the Malifaux Ice Gammon that I'm painting up for a demo kit, but you can use them on a variety of models, and I'll explain when you want to use which techniques as I'm actually showing the techniques themselves. So before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about painting minis in general. Now, each time you paint, there's going to be three things that you want to do. You want to lay down a base coat, you want to put a highlight on the model, and you want to put a shade on the model. Now, those can be done in different orders, and there's a variety of ways that you can go about implementing those types of things on your models. But today we're going to start with the most simple techniques. All right, so before we get to the actual painting techniques, you do have to prepare your miniatures by priming them. A lot of miniatures will be like this, and they'll have just be bare plastic. Paint does not stick to bare plastic very well. So what you want to do is you want to get primer. I use Privateer Press Primer. There's a whole bunch of other companies that make primers. There's white, there's black. The models I used, I actually didn't use this type of spray-on primer. I used an airbrush primer. The reason being is that I primed indoors because I live in sunny Seattle, Washington, where it's not always great priming weather. So however you prime it, you want to make sure that you do that before you put paint down. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about priming once I can show you the model. So you'll see here, I primed this guy white. And you can even see, hopefully you can see that he's not perfectly coated. I did a really light coat of primer because really what you're doing is you're just trying to give the paint something to stick to that's not the plastic. So you can see a little bit of plastic here underneath the leg, but it has enough primer there that it's going to catch. It's going to give it some tooth and give the paint something to stick to. So after you have your stuff primed, you can move on to base coating. All right, so we're all primed up. Now I'm going to teach you the first technique, which is base coating. This is where you pick a color and you paint whatever area of the model you want to be that color. It makes sense. Just watch it. Okay, so the first thing we do once we decide what base coat color we want is we mix it up on the palette. Now, you want to make sure that your paints are watered down because they're too thick. It won't go on smooth and you'll see a lot of brush strokes in your paint job. So what I normally do is around 2 to 1 water to paint ratio. This is just regular water. I put in a dropper bottle. And I'll mix this up. Usually I use just like the back of an older brush to mix it up. And that looks pretty good. So it's not like super runny, but it will go on smooth, which is what we want. And that will be the base coat for our little ice gammon guys. Yeah, it'll be some blue colors. All right, so here's one of the ice gammon. He's already primed. And I'm going to do some base coating on him. So just get some paint on my brush. Now, I know that these guys are all sort of the same color, so I'm not going to be too careful with where I'm going on the model itself. I can be pretty liberal with it. Obviously, if you're base coating something that is more exact, then you'll have to be more exact. Boom. Blue. So after the models are base coated, now we're going to use the next technique, which is called dry brushing. Now, dry brushing is pretty simple. You'll see it in a couple seconds here. But just know that this is like a highlighting technique that is used to sort of put lighter colors on the raised areas of models to simulate the highlights that you would get from, lights bouncing off raised surfaces. Apparently my face is raised. Okay, so the next step we're going to teach for this one is dry brushing. And I'm not going to actually show you how to dry brush on the ice gammon. I'm going to show you on this base right here because it'll actually show you the effect a little bit more. But what dry brushing basically is you're going to put paint on your brush. In this example, I'm going to be using some white paint because it'll show up great on video. Um, Now, with dry brushing, you don't actually want to water the paint down. You just want to get the paint on a brush. I'm going to use this large tank brush here, and I'm just going to get paint on the brush, wipe some of it off. But that's not dry enough yet. You're actually, and this is sort of counterintuitive, you're going to basically rub the brush on a paper towel or some other surface. I would probably recommend a paper towel. So you basically rub the brush on the paper towel until you no longer see paint. Uh, you can see a little bit of coming off of my hand there, but I just want to keep rubbing it until I no longer see paint. I'm using my hand because it's not white like the paper is. Anyways, so once you get the paint off, your brush is basically dry. However, when you run it over a textured surface like this base right here, you'll actually see it begin to sort of pick up the raised details. Let's see, you can kind of see it there a little bit. Let's go a little bit heavier. Again, I'm just trying to pick up the raised details and texture of the piece. So you can see it kind of right there. What started off as a black base has become basically a gray base. But really the edges are what is like pronounced from the paint. So those same techniques we're going to apply to the ice gammon. We're just going to use this over the electric blue. All right, so let's dry brush these ice gammon. Like I said, I'm going to use the sky blue from Vallejo. And I'm going to do the same thing I did with the this base here. I'm just going to get some paint on my brush, using a smaller brush now, obviously, because it's a smaller model. And I'm going to wipe paint off. Like that. And I'm just going to take my ice gammon and I'm going to run this over the entire surface of the model. So you can see his face there. Let's see if I can. Okay, so I finished dry brushing the blue here. I'm going to make them a little bit lighter though, because of the next step is going to actually bring them back down a bit, make them a bit darker. Next step is going to be adding shade. So before I do that, I'm going to do another very, very light coat now of white. So you can see here that basically the dry brush hit all of like the raised areas like that. This is after the white dry brush. So you can see it basically adds a little bit of depth to the model itself. And now we can do the shading step. So after the dry brushing is done, now we're going to add the last step for these models, and that's going to be adding some shade to them. We're going to do that using a technique called washing. Washes are thin paints or inks that are used to shade models. Typically, they're a little bit darker than the base coat, and they're designed to seep into the cracks and the crevices of the model to land where shadows would land if the models were real and this was real life. Well, they are real, but you get it. You understand what I'm saying. Okay, so what I have here is a wash, and it's a wash because it's a very, very thin, uh, basically type of paint. I mean, you can see how thin and like watery this is. Now, there are some brands that make those, like Secret Weapon, for example. I use a lot of their washes. This one just happens to be a mix that I made. But like I said, there's a lot of different brands of washers out there, and they're all designed to be used right out of the bottle. What this is going to do is give us our shade, and you'll see why in a second. So this is the Gammon after dry brushing. The last thing I'm going to do to it is I'm going to do that wash like I was just talking about. So to do this, I'm going to just get some wash on my brush and basically just rub it over. And the idea of a wash is it is designed to flow into the cracks and the crevices of the model. Now this wash is a very thin blue wash. They come in all sorts of colors, but you can already see how basically it's kind of going into the crevice areas and giving it some shadow. Now the cool thing about washes is if I take my brush, for example, and I rub some of it off, I can actually pull up some of the wash and kind of move it around a little bit, soak it up, and get it where I need it to go. And with this guy, I'm going to show you how liberal I'm being with this wash. So you can really see how it goes into, flows into the cracks. Because it's so watery, basically it goes into the recessed areas. It kind of stays there. And that, when it dries, will basically become like a shaded area on the model. And then you can see like there's a little bit stuck there in between the head and the rock, and I'll just soak it up just like that with my brush. Yep, side by side. So you can see the wash on this one right here, and this one is sort of not. The wash has kind of blended the colors a little bit and given it more of a uniform sort of shaded look. All right, and that's pretty much it. Those are the three main techniques that I think everyone should get started with and kind of learn and practice with those. Now, the cool thing about painting is that you can use your own creativity. There's no one telling you the right or wrong way to do things. For example, you could choose to do things in different orders. You could put a base coat on, then a wash, then dry brush that. You can put a base coat on and then dry brush over that, and then put a wash on, and then put a different wash with a dry brush and another wash on top, whatever. Really, the sky's the limit. Just experiment, try different stuff out, and see kind of how things go. Now, you might be saying, okay, well, your models were just completely blue. That's not really fair because my models aren't all blue. My models have cloaks and backpacks and faces and pants and shirts and stuff like that. Well, trust me, these techniques can be used on most models. You just have to be a little bit more careful than I was in that tutorial about applying things. For example, if you're painting a blue cloak, maybe you base coat the cloak first, dry brush the cloak, wash the cloak, then move on to something else like the tunic or something that's not a upper body piece of apparel. You get the idea. I'll try to finish up another model using only these techniques and post it maybe later this week so you can actually see a full model that's not just one flat color. But hopefully that is enough to get you guys started. Thank you so much for asking the questions. Of course, you can jump into the comments below if you have actual questions specifically about the models that you're trying to paint. and I can definitely offer some tips. Or if you figure all this stuff out and you want to know some maybe more advanced stuff, or actually see what I do when I paint my models typically now, feel free to ask that as well. Anyways, that's going to be it for today's vlog, and I will see you next time. Support your local game store.